Hi, it's Bill Scher again for another edition of Scherable. This is number 2 in the Scherable series. And the first one on Monday, the 21st of September 2020, was having faint glimmers of optimism at the possibility that the Supreme Court nomination of Donald Trump might be blocked with 4 Republicans crossing over, not predicting it, not saying it was high odds, but talking about what one could do to try to make that happen. As of today, Wednesday, the odds of that look even less likely. We have Mitt Romney, Chuck Grassley, and Cory Gardner all saying they're not going to deny off the top. Only Collins and Murkowski saying that they don't think we should do that. But even their statements have bits of wiggle room to them, particularly when you get past the election into the lame duck, if a vote takes that long. So I wouldn't retract anything I said 2 days ago. I still think people should call their Senate offices if you're in Republican states. We still don't have a nomination yet. That person hasn't gone through a public vetting process yet. And so a flood of phone calls to certain senators, might yield a surprise. Again, I'm not saying place any bets, but I'm saying you wouldn't want to give up prematurely. Having said that, it is worth thinking through what the future is going to look like, bracing oneself for a 6-3 conservative court, and one that is even more likely to do what many on the liberal progressive left fear the most, an overturning of Roe v. Wade. And there was a somewhat pleasant surprise this session when John Roberts did not allow Louisiana to proceed with a severely restrictive abortion law, saying it would violate precedent. Some noted that his reasoning did not shut the door for accepting those restrictions if framed in a different way, and that John Roberts should not be seen as any sort of reliable pro-choice vote at this point. But it is a reminder that you can never fully predict the court. And the court is designed that way. The court is designed with lifetime appointments to be insulated as much as possible from partisan political pressures. And so you do find judges doing things that their initial supporters did not think they would do or want them to do. And that's one of the reasons why conservatives are so deeply frustrated that even though they have controlled the court, Republicans have had the majority of the court since 1969. And they can't get a lot of things that they want, top of the list being the overturning of Roe v. Wade. This time could well be different. This time they might have vetted to such a thorough degree that they're going to get, if not Roberts, a hard 5 with Alito, Thomas, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and perhaps whoever Trump picks now. It's also possible that a John Roberts, wary of doing something so dramatic, he's the chief, so he gets to assign opinions. And so if he wants to write the opinion, he gets to write it. So if Roberts continues his incrementalist approach, his cautious approach, he may chip away at Roe, which hardly is something to celebrate, but he might stop short of and try to restrain the majority from doing something so explosive as flat out overturning it. But still, I think we should think through what might happen in that circumstance. That's something I wrote about a couple of years ago when Kavanaugh was nominated, and it seemed like that it might be even more imminent at that point. Because if it is overturned, it's not the end of the debate. It's not the end of the fight. It would allow several states to pass their own laws, and some states have laws in place that would get triggered to ban Roe outright or restrict it severely. Last I checked, there are a couple of organizations that track this: Center for Reproductive Rights and the Alan Guttmacher Institute. I believe the Guttmacher Institute, I think, says, it's 19 states would have bans on all or nearly all abortions triggered automatically. And then you have other states that have expressed the intent to restrict or would have other restrictions short of near total bans that could kick in as well. So you'd split the country down the middle, roughly, between reproductively free states and states without reproductive freedom, pro-choice states and pro-life states. And that is a disturbing thought. It's not exactly the same as having slave states and free states. But it is a situation where you have a right in some states and you don't have that right in other states. You are less free in certain states. And that is a difficult dynamic to sustain a united country with. I mean, we had a situation very briefly where certain states you could enter into a same-sex marriage and certain states you couldn't. And that tension was resolved very quickly by a Supreme Court decision extending that right across the country. When you have a situation where some states have rights and some states you don't, that's going to cause movement. If you want to get an abortion and you live in a state where you're not free to do so, if you have the means, you would travel. I imagine there will be philanthropic organizations that will try to help people who don't have the means make those trips. And I wouldn't put it past any state to pass laws saying that's illegal. You're not allowed to cross lines to get an abortion. And that would be roughly analogous to a Fugitive Slave Act from 1850, where you're telling the free states you have to take an action to return a slave to a slave state, which made the North apoplectic, that Southern states were telling them what they had to do. So again, it's not exactly the same. We don't want to get into an oppression Olympics here, but there are some fundamental parallels between what life is like, what democracy is like when rights don't extend fully across state lines. That kind of situation would not be treated lightly by folks who are for reproductive freedom. The political backlash would be something of an intensity that I don't think we've experienced in our lifetimes. Which is why I would say, if I was a Republican, if I was a conservative, if I was pro-life, I would still, if I'm still Bill Scher, I'd still be a pragmatist. And I would give my pragmatist advice to whoever wishes it. I would say to pro-lifers, is this really what you want? Think about it. Are you really getting what you want by creating that kind of divided America? What is it do you want anyway? If you want to end abortion, you're not. There are going to be reproductively free states. You're never going to find a situation where there will be such a national consensus around ending abortion that you not only can overturn Roe v. Wade, but you can pass 50 state laws or even pass a federal law. That's just not going to happen. As I said in the last show, perhaps we should be careful not to express certainty in our punditry, but I feel pretty strongly about that. Just as I have said to folks on the left, you're not going to pass single payer as hard as you try. There are some fundamental roadblocks into doing so. I think they're different roadblocks. I don't want to make this into a single payer episode, but that is a parallel dynamic when you have a group of people who are so fixated on a particular goal, and they think nothing short of that goal is going to be satisfying, that they're unwilling to think through what the political obstacles are, and either adjust strategy or adjust their policy goals. So when Mitch McConnell told Democrats in 2013, when they first eliminated the filibuster for lower court appointees using the so-called nuclear option in the Senate, McConnell said, "You're going to regret this and a lot sooner than you think." I think this may well hold true for the anti-abortion movement today. Not that they won't get their judge, they may well overturn Roe v. Wade. But what does that produce? Does it produce fewer abortions? Maybe on net it will if you ban it in enough states. But of course, once these severe restrictions happen in certain states, even states today that you consider very conservative, when it starts affecting a whole lot of people, there are, I think in the most recent year that we have data, I believe it's about 860,000 abortions, which is a low. And I think as a per capita rate, roughly where it was when Roe was first decided in 72, if not even a little bit lower. I haven't checked the graph, but it's around there. And whether that is because of expanded contraception or because it's restricted in certain areas, I think it's more the contraception element, but you can't discount, both factors. But the important thing, certainly expanded use of contraception, expanded understanding of sex education plays a huge role here. And if your actual goal was to have the greatest number of reduced abortion, the lowest number of total abortions, I would suggest the pragmatic thing to do would be to partner with Democrats around robust access to contraception and sex education. That would actually do the trick. But if your goals go well beyond that, we know that a lot of folks on the pro-life side don't like such education, things that encourage it, because it's not just about abortion; it's also about a sense of morality, what they consider moral standards. They don't want to promote premarital sex or teenage sex and the like, and so they are very reluctant to enter into those sorts of compromises. But politics is about compromise. You're not going to get what you want in total. It is never going to happen. So if you think an all-out culture war is desirable, knowing it can never be won, one side will never win completely. You're okay with that. Stay on the path you're on. But if you had the more pragmatic sensibility, you would think twice about the path you were taking. Now, from the Democratic standpoint, from the pro-choice standpoint, on one hand, everything that I laid out there is terribly dark. People will be impacted. There will be young women whose economic prospects will be severely constrained. Their life choices won't be their own because Roe v. Wade got overturned, if that does happen, or even short of that, even if it's severely restricted. And so no one should be sanguine about that scenario. But at the same time, no one should think of that as the end of the story, because not only would the fight continue, there would be great renewed interest, I suspect, beyond the existing base of pro-choice voters, because it's going to become a lot less theoretical for a whole lot of people in that circumstance. And so the states that now seem deeply conservative, deeply socially conservative, may become less so because of this. Backlashes are real. Backlashes happen. That's how things change often. And so I'm not wishing it. I'm not a believer in accelerationist theory that you should look forward to hitting rock bottom so you can try to capitalize on the backlash, because people do get hurt in the process. But I think people should be aware that there will be opportunities to change the conversation, the dynamic, and laws. And that's relevant to think about now, because it speaks to the question, how should Democrats respond imminently if this seat is filled? Should they, if Democrats win the presidency, if Democrats win the Senate this year, in January 2021, should they immediately eliminate the filibuster? Should they immediately expand the size of the court so Roe v. Wade does not get overturned? And I understand the impulse for that, because in the short run, if you can prevent that overturning or prevent a severe weakening, you will extend freedom to hundreds of thousands of women. I think the problem with that path is that if Democrats can pack the court, so can Republicans. There will be a time when Republicans will have the presidency and the Senate. It could be as soon as 2025. Who knows? Backlashes. I mean, we've had a lot of pendulum swinging in the past 20 years. So do not discount the possibility that that could happen that quickly. And if the court becomes a political agency, like a commission, where you can swap out people, add people anytime you get the reins of power, well, you don't have a Supreme Court anymore as we know it. You don't have a Supreme Court that issues rulings that extend beyond administrations. You don't have stare decisis. You don't have precedent. And that creates its own destabilization of the three pillars of our democracy that would have devastating consequences, and would not necessarily protect women, protect their reproductive freedom. So there's just no shortcut here. There's no procedural shortcut if the seat gets filled and if Roe v. Wade gets overturned. That's why I think it's useful to have a long view that thinks about other means of winning the fight, or at least getting an upper hand in the fight, because again, these things are never completely won or lost, over the long haul. Not saying it's a cut and dry argument. I understand completely the desire and the short-term benefit of the court packing approach. But I do fear we're going down a very bad path if we fail to hold on to the longer view and recognize that there are ways to fight on that don't destabilize the things in our democracy that have made it work for so long. There's a reason why the founders didn't want a tyranny of the majority. There's a reason why they feared that democracy wouldn't last unless there were checks and balances, diffusion of power, more than just simple direct democracy. And that thinking has worked over the long haul to keep America existing, to keep the idea of democracy thriving. So I hate to do talks that don't end on uplifting notes, but these are trying times. I thank you for listening. This has been Scherable. I'm Bill Scher. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll be back for another one real soon. Take care.